Greetings everyone, thank you for coming to my channel. In this video, you'll be learning about double prepositions. And before I get started, I just wanted to thank you guys for the love and support. Thank you guys for watching my videos, and thank you to those of you that have been liking my videos. That tells me that the videos are providing value. And don't be afraid to leave feedback. That could be positive feedback or negative feedback, as long as the negative feedback is respectful. I would call it constructive criticism. Okay, now let's get to the video. Double prepositions are formed by combining two prepositions into one word. They give us more info about location, direction, or movement. Here are some double prepositions that I'll be discussing in this video. Into, upon, onto, without, inside, outside, throughout, and within. First, we have into, which refers to entry or insertion. That word is hard to pronounce. Insertion? Insertion. I'm pretty sure it's not insertion. I think it's insertion. No, that sounds weird. Insertion, insertion. This is like the T is kind of silent. Insertion. Okay, I had to look this up to make sure I was pronouncing it correctly. So it's insertion. Insertion. Okay, that makes sense. But didn't I say that? Insertion? I think I said insertion, but it sounded weird. Okay, so our first example says she walked into the tunnel. In other words, she entered the tunnel. Our second example says the kids disappeared into the woods. In other words, the kids entered the woods. And our last example says the ball rolled into the pond. In other words, the ball entered the pond. Well, it was rolling first and then it entered the pond. Next, we have upon, which means an event that happens after another event. So our first example says you will be greeted upon arrival. So in other words, you will be greeted when or after you arrive. Our second example says upon receiving the devastating news, she burst into tears. So in other words, she received the devastating news and then she started crying. And our last example says, upon hearing her name being called, she walked on stage to get her diploma. That sounds kind of weird. Upon hearing her name being called. English is kind of weird sometimes, but I love it. So in other words, when or after she heard her name called, she walked on stage to get her diploma. Next, we have onto, which refers to a position that is on top of something else. So our first example says the dog jumped onto the table. So now the dog is on top of the table, a position that is on top of something else. Our second example says he walked onto the boat. So now he's on top of the boat. Well, not necessarily on top of the boat, but he's on the boat, which means he's positioned on top of something else. The boat is under him. And our last example says the kid climbed onto the roof. So the kid is positioned on the roof, which means he's on top of something else. He's on top of the roof. Next, we have without, which means the absence of something. Our first example says he went to school without his backpack. So that means he went to school and he doesn't have his backpack. He most likely left his backpack at home. Our next example says I'm eating my cereal without a spoon. So I'm eating my cereal, but I don't have a spoon. And our last example says I attended the concert without my friend. So I went to the concert, but I didn't bring my friend. Maybe my friend was sick and couldn't make it to the concert, or maybe my friend and I got in an argument and she decided that she didn't want to come with me, or maybe my friend had something better to do and she just didn't want to come to the concert. Next, we have inside, which means being enclosed or within a boundary. So our first example says I left my purse inside my car. So the car would be considered an enclosed space. So that's why we used inside. My purse is inside an enclosed space. That enclosed space is my car. Our next example says, my new shoes are still inside the box. So the box will be considered an enclosed space. And my shoes, well, my new shoes are still inside the box. And our last example says we went inside the house. So the house would be considered an enclosed space. You can close the doors to the house and the house will be enclosed. Next we have outside, which is the opposite of inside, and it also means beyond the boundaries of. So our first example says I left my shoes outside on the porch. So my shoes aren't inside the house with me, they're outside on the porch. Our second example says the lady is standing outside in the rain. So the lady isn't standing inside of a building or inside of a house or inside of anything. She's standing outside in the rain. And our last example says we stood outside for hours waiting for the event to start. So we weren't standing inside of a building waiting for the event to start, or inside of a lobby area, or inside of a house, or inside of anything for that matter. We were standing outside. Next we have throughout, which means during the entire period. Our first example says I played sports throughout high school. So this just means I played sports throughout my entire time in high school. Our second example says he remained respectful throughout the argument. So this just means throughout the whole argument, he remained respectful. And our last example says please remain seated throughout the event. So this just means during the whole event, stay in your seat. Also, keep in mind there's more than one way to say something. For example, our last sentence says please remain seated throughout the event. You could also say please remain seated during the event. And lastly, we have within, which means physical boundaries, and time or deadlines. Our first example says please stay within the boundaries of the school. Another way of saying that would be please stay close to the school. Our second example says your package will arrive within 2 business days. Another way of saying this would be your package will arrive in the next 2 days, or in the next 2 business days. And our last example says I will make a decision within the next 3 days. You could also say I will make a decision in the next 3 days. Also keep in mind these double prepositions, some of them have, actually a lot of them have multiple meanings. So make sure you're using them as prepositions. And of course, prepositions give us more info on time, location, distance, and so on. That concludes this video. Thank you guys for coming. I hope you found this video informative. If you did find this video informative, please feel free to like, comment, or subscribe, or all of the above, and I'll see you next time.